Good afternoon, and welcome to Training for the Time Crunched Athlete with Coach Matt Dixon. Matt is the founder and head coach of Purple Patch Fitness, an endurance sports coaching company that provides a customized training experience for athletes of all levels, from beginners through to elites. His master's degree in clinical and exercise physiology, combined with his experience as an elite swimmer and professional triathlete, form the backbone of his coaching philosophy, the Purple Patch Pillars of Performance, a much broader and adaptive view of the path to peak performance than conventional endurance sports coaching. He is a highly sought after resource in the fitness and endurance community, writing and contributing to multiple publications and organizations such as Triathlete Magazine, USA Triathlon, Outside Magazine, and PowerTap. He's also been featured in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Men's Journal, Outside Magazine, Men's Fitness, and Men's Health. Matt is the author of the soon-to-be-released Fast Track Triathlete and the Well-Built Triathlete. He is also an Ironman University master coach, lead hydration advisor for Camelback, and education expert for CycleOps PowerTap, our co-host for today's webinar. He also sits on the advisory board for Lumo Technologies. With Matt Dixon's Purple Patch Pillars of Performance, athletes of varying goals and abilities are able to train throughout the week using the same Purple Patch philosophy and methodology. The Purple Patch mission is to create an effective program for all to follow that fits into life's demands without forcing athletes into a standardized program that simply doesn't fit into their busy life. With that, I'm going to hand you over to Matt Dixon.
Thank you very much, Jordan. That makes me sound far more important than I am, but appreciate it, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We're going to dive deep on time-efficient training today, and particularly focus and hone in on using the bike trainer as your tool to help you make a more effective trainer. And so, yes, I am the CEO and founder of Purple Patch, and I think many of you guys may know us best for our professional athletes that we coach. We've had a pretty good resume of athletes that we've had over the last years. But our sweet spot for coaching, I feel, is to really create solutions for very busy people. It's a passion for mine, coming back from my athletic background and history. And I have a particular passion. It's why I've written the second book, Fast Track Triathlete. It's exactly this. So, of course, this webinar tonight really has a really resonance with me and our coaching philosophy. So I hope that you can draw some of that out of our discussions as we go through today. So there's really going to be two parts to this. The second part is in the meat and potatoes. That's where we're going to be talking about the type of training sessions that I might utilize on a bike trainer, and where a bike trainer can actually be utilized, and where it's a good place to be utilized in your training, whether you're a cyclist, whether you're a triathlete, and also equally where it's not. So I'm going to actually do a little bit of a deep dive into the key training sessions that we might use, and show you some case studies so that you can really come away with hopefully some insight into the mindset and the practical approach of how you might utilize the bike trainer. But in order to do that, I think that we need some context first. And I think that we actually need to spend a little bit of time in part one framing a really healthy performance mindset, allowing you to understand my belief system, how we go about training, and actually think about the fundamentals to training success. And so let's dive into the philosophical side first, and then we'll get to the nuts and bolts and go through some of the training sessions. At the end of this, you'll have an opportunity to ask me questions. We have plenty of questions in advance that we're going to try and get through as many as we can. But you guys attending live, we hope to be able to get through some of those questions as well. So without further ado, let's talk about the performance mindset. And this word performance is really important for me. It's a very personal journey. And of course, I help athletes trying to achieve world championships at the professional level. But at the same time, I think the common thread for everybody that participates in endurance sports is the desire to improve. And I think for many of you guys attending live here, the desire to improve has to be placed within context of life. And that's what I'm going to explain first of all when we go through this. So let's actually first frame training. Let's go through training and actually think about what our mission is. Assuming that we are all goal-oriented, we want to arrive to races or events, our real mission of training beyond perhaps making us feel good and improving fitness and having better vibrancy in life. When we think about training rather than exercising, our goal is to arrive at our races ready to perform. And I want you to remember that when we go through the presentation. The goal is not to independently just get fitter, get stronger. Those are a route, but ultimately there's no prizes for who is the fittest. The prize is a one-to-one for your own self to arrive at your race ready to perform. And that requires real context with the mission that we're looking to do. What we're looking to do as individual athletes is to create successful training, is we're looking to maximize our training load while achieving positive adaptations. And that's a really important second piece of that sentence. We want to maximize our training load, but we always want to achieve positive adaptations. So rest assured that your body will adapt to training. And it will adapt in either a positive way, you get fitter, stronger, more powerful, more resilient, or it will adapt in a negative way, over stress, over fatigue, hormonal stress, or worse still, injury. And so when we think about a time-starved athlete, we either have time-rich athletes or time-starved athlete. When we think about the busy lives that we live, I always like to think that the question is not how many hours do I have to do to get ready for this event. In fact, the way that we should think about it is to take a really honest appraisal of your life and all of the other stresses that you have in the life, and actually start with a solution of how many hours do I have? And then we have a phrase that you're going to come back to in today's presentation. We have to create an optimization mindset. And that's what we'll be creating today, is an optimization. How do we maximize the available training hours that we have? And that's fundamental to our belief system as we go through. So let me underline that by giving a parallel between a professional athlete, and in my world, it's a professional triathlete. I am lucky enough to work with some of the best professional triathletes in the world, and how they go about training versus us, the people that have very busy lives with lots to integrate with family, friends, work, potential travel, and everything else. Well, with the professional athlete, it all starts with the role or the place that training has in life. And if they are truly a professional athlete, life is suppressed as much as possible. Everything in life is focused and built around training because their profession demands it. And so we start with training, and then my job is to try and make the other complex things of life, whether it be travel, whether it be outside work, which obviously most of them don't work outside, we make those stresses as minimal as possible. In other words, their whole existence is wrapped around and focused around training. When we think about us as busy amateurs, hobbyists, very serious hobbyists sometimes, but hobbyists, we have some unmovable things that we must also perform in life. We have work, we have our relationships, potentially our children, we have a social life, at least I hope we have a social life. And really the mindset, the optimization mindset of all of this is that for you to be successful, you can't just have an accumulation mindset. You need to successfully integrate training into your life. So what that means as an outcome, and this might sound utopian, but the truth of the matter is, as an outcome, is if you are successful in doing this, you create sustainability, you create consistency, and not only will you be able to move towards your improved results, because you should be able to be healthy, you should be able to yield positive adaptations from your training, but the knock-on effect should be that you have better performance opportunity in your workplace, you have more energy to give to your family and friends, and you have ultimately this utopian concept of a little bit more of a balanced life. It doesn't mean it doesn't come with sacrifice. It doesn't mean it's not a challenge. But ultimately, life is a big and nasty, ebb and flow of stress. And so we need to always remember this when we're thinking about us, because this is why I always talk about performance in context. Now, the irony of all of this is that most of the stuff that you'll read in magazines, most of the stuff that you'll read in articles is informed by the way the pros do it. And that's fantastic. The pros can be a lovely laboratory of learning, of training stress and how the body responds to it. But the game that we're playing is slightly different. We're building or approaching with a pragmatic integration mindset. So with that in mind, what are some of the pitfalls when it comes to your training globally? Well, the first is exactly that, an accumulation mindset. One of the pitfalls of many amateur athletes is their barometer of success around training is focused around the simple accumulation of training hours or training miles. But that can lead to a cascade of really bad decision making, because you end up trying to fit in too many hours that you can genuinely sustain in your life, and you end up making bad decisions. I'm going to skip on sleep. I'm going to cram it in. And the ultimate net result is that you're training, you become fit, but you become fatigued. In other words, it's not effective training. You're punching the clock, but you're not yielding the positive adaptations that you're really looking for. In accumulation, or in parallel to that, if you have the accumulation mindset, you also end up having a knock-on effect to the other areas of life. You end up losing the ability to focus, the ability to think critically, the ability to have balanced energy in the day. It impacts your work life, and then of course knocks over to relationships and social life. In other words, you end up chasing hours, but ultimately you're not yielding performance. So we want to avoid that at all costs when we think about effective training. We also want to avoid training monotony. One of the keys that you'll see today is one of the words, the themes that will come through every workout. I'm going to go through different types of workouts, different intensity of workouts, but the theme you're going to see is variance. The body responds really well to variance. The typical casualty or catalyst for monotonous training, which the body does not like hormonally and does not yield positive adaptations from, is people going too hard on the easy days. So if you remember nothing else today, if you go easy, easy, easy on the days that are designed to be easy, facilitating recovery, it's going to help you be ready for the more challenging days. So we want to avoid that as well. We also have to realize that while many of you might be coached, maybe if you might create your own coaching plans and some form of training plan, we have to realize that life is not a spreadsheet. It isn't static, it's dynamic. And so we have to have a mindset that if we're going to be successful, we have to navigate our training plan with the ability and willingness to ebb and flow. And I talk a lot about this in my book. How do we create a training program where when life actually drops down and ebbs a little bit, we can actually turn up the meter of training because our body can absorb it? On the flip side, when life gets very busy, maybe you have to travel for work, maybe you've got kids' activities on top of work, maybe you've got a deadline at work, whatever it might be. How do we intelligently pull back, retreat, and have a little less training load while still achieving positive adaptations? Life brings us rest days. Life brings us easier training. And rather than causing that to be a cause of stress, instead, you can shift your mindset and have a dynamic mindset and manage that all the way through. And that requires the final pitfall that we want to avoid as a time-starved athlete is getting stuck in the weeds, the 1,000-foot view. I always view training levels at really 3 levels. The 10,000-foot view, which is the whole of your season, mapping the master roadmap. The 5,000-foot view, where you're always keeping a little bit of a mindset of what's happened before and planning for what's going to happen in the future, both in terms of life and in training. And then the day-to-day level, the 1,000-foot view, where your feet are pretty much on the ground and you're executing the session. When you're in that session, while you required focus, you can't be myopic. And so you can't just arrive and punch the clock. You have to think about what's happened before, retain focus, and realize what's coming up. And that's going to be the basis of your decision making. So when we go through this at the most universal philosophical level, these are the primary pitfalls that really drag an athlete down when they're time starved. So how do you set yourself up for success? Well, the first thing in your training program, whether you build it or whether you have a coach building it for you, is it's critical that you understand the intent. Unless you are empowered to understand why you're doing what you're doing and what you're hoping to achieve out of it, you cannot be successful. So if you are coached, I'd really encourage you to have a dialogue with the coach. Immerse yourself in understanding on the why, because the knowledge is power. The second component then is to execute that intent as well as you can. And the actual finite details, everyone obsesses so much about the specific intervals, but it's really the rhythm and the intent of the program, of any training program, which is where the magic gold is. So if you can understand and then execute on the rhythm and the intent of the program, rather than becoming obsessed with every single interval done absolutely right and checking the box, you're going to have a much better opportunity for success over the course of the entirety of your training program, the accumulation of your training program. And that leads me into the big picture lens. The magic word here that we're always seeking is consistency. We're always looking for consistency. And that, coming back to that dynamic mindset, when life brings us rest days, it's important to be able to make decisions on a daily basis that can help set you up for real consistency. The last two things, the last of which I already mentioned, is life brings us rest days. But the one other component that's going to be really important for you to be successful, because you are time crunched, because you have less time to train than the person that is time rich, maybe the professional athlete or your competition that has much more time to train, we need to actually think in terms of optimization. And for you to get the biggest yield and for you to execute the intent of the workout, you have to be present. You actually have to have focus. Now, tangentially, that has a really good effect for you, because by being present, the other thing that you can do in the 6, 8, 10 hours a week of training that you might go and execute is that can actually play the role of almost meditation. Because if you are truly present in your workout, and you're really thinking about the session, there's a much higher likelihood that everything in life is going to dissipate. And that's where it's emotionally cleansing. And so actually being present is not being obsessive. In fact, I actually see it as an opportunity to escape. But it's also going to ensure that you execute with intent and that you get the most out of the hour or 2 hours that you get to train. So at very basic terms, before we dive into the training sessions, I can't get through this session without talking about the basics. So interestingly, this nail the basics, and we always talk about nail the basics at Purple Patch. And a lot of it, this is a high level view of really distilling what I just talked about into the fundamental drivers. And with today's obsession around metrics and tools and gadgets and equipment and recovery and massage and distinct training intervals and everything else that can make this very, very complex, I think that there are some real fundamental basics that can provide you with the platform to be successful. Now, interestingly, this slide here, I pulled from the slide that I gave to my professional athletes a couple of years ago. And I said, we are not going to talk about wheel depth or tire pressure or aerodynamic wind tunnels until we nail the basics. And this has been our driving mantra at Purple Patch for the last couple of seasons. If you can nail the basics, the fundamental basics, you are 9/10 of the way to be successful. Yes, metrics have their role. Yes, power meters are wonderful. Yes, the right fitting wetsuit is critical. Yes, aerodynamics is important, but beneath it all, the bedrock, the boulder, are these basics. And so very briefly, the first, the intent of the workout. That's going to be our focus today. What is the intent? What's the specific plan? And making sure that you've got the right program for you, a smart training program. Obviously a basic thing, an important component. Second to that is the realization that that training program is a spreadsheet and life is not. And so the willingness to be a passenger and an active participant in your training program with the willingness to adjust based on fatigue, based on training response, based on how you're feeling, and based on what life is throwing your way. So the willingness to have a dynamic mindset is number 2. Number 3, I mentioned before, focus, be present in your workouts. And then the last 3, number 4, you've got the fuel gauge there. One of the most common mistakes for amateur athletes I see is following workouts, the failure to refuel or consume calories following workouts. If you do a workout, every time as a habit, you want to consume calories following the workout. A very basic thing, the most common thing that we see an athlete get wrong. A discussion for another day, but it's worthy of mention here. The final 2, smoking jackets. The nice man smoking the cigar in a smoking jacket, sitting by his fire, dog by his feet, probably whiskey in hand. All very good stuff. What does smoking jackets mean? Smoking jackets on the days that are designed to be easy for recuperation or preparation for upcoming hard work, make them easy. Make sure that you're making a big delta between your easy days so that your hard sessions can be strong. And then the final component, your biggest recovery tool, the most important recovery tool, the most important catalyst to having balanced energy, sleep. And it's not just about hours of sleep, it's about quality of sleep as well. So there are the basics, a smart program that you're willing to adjust, that you can be focused on the intent, you refuel full in the workout, the easy days are easy, and you don't forget sleep. Get those right on a weekly basis, layer training week to week to week to week with a great rhythm intent. I promise you, you will improve. So that's the basics, that's the fundamentals of a training philosophy, and specifically focused for a time-crunched athlete. But let's talk about the trainer, because ultimately the reality for us, whether you're a cyclist, whether you're a triathlete, the reality is that the trainer is a wonderful tool. It's a wonderful tool for effectiveness, time efficiency, and also some specific training. So we're going to dive in, part 2 of this presentation, we're going to dive into what the trainer is and how to use it effectively, and give you some insight into some of the sessions and the approaches that I would use for an athlete just like yourself. The first thing I want to establish my own belief, and I often get this question, and I thought I might get this question today, so I decided to answer it ahead of time. If you spend an hour on the trainer, it is an hour on the trainer. So I'm not a massive fan of saying an hour on the trainer is 2 hours on the road, or 2 hours on the trainer is 4 hours on the road. It is a tool. It's a wonderful tool to use, but it should be used and treated significantly like what it is. An hour on the trainer is an hour on the trainer. It's not worthwhile for you to try and correlate it to outside. It's just a tool to maximize your training efficiency. So let's talk about the bike trainer globally. I think it's important before we dive into the sessions to realize and establish what you cannot do on a trainer. So there are some things that are really important for you to becoming a better rider and a better athlete that you cannot achieve effectively on a bike trainer. The first is handling skills, cornering, descending, braking, etc., etc. You cannot achieve that on a bike trainer. You cannot also effectively, intuitively, really train. You can simulate it, but you can't really train the tool of terrain management, how to actually ride into a headwind, how to ride in a tailwind, how to go through rolling terrain. All of that is real world riding. And finally, the vast majority of trainers out there, and I will cast a blanket out of all of them, I don't think that you can truly learn how to stand effectively out of the saddle on a bike trainer. And that's a really important tool to actually be able to establish to change postural stress and load. So those are some things that you can't do. But the trainer is really effective for other components of our training. It's highly effective training in a controlled environment. It gives you the opportunity, when you're not influenced by cars, traffic, terrain, and everything that you can't work on, it gives you the opportunity to actually really focus and become habitual on great posture, which is critically important, and great pedal stroke. And of course, it's a good yield for your buck. It's very efficient for training. And if you are time starved, it's a great training tool. I think when we approach it, it's important for you as an athlete to know your mission, what you're using it for, and have the courage to think out of the box. And one of the big mistakes that I see often is athletes just try and mimic their outdoor riding with indoor riding. Oh, crikey, I was going to do a 4-hour endurance ride today. That means I've got to plug the trainer in for 4 hours and do 4 hours steady state. Well, firstly, not very fun. Secondly, probably not the biggest return on investment that you can yield. So hopefully that will bubble up as we go through. It's great for your midweek intervals. It's great for specific building block work. We'll get into that in a second. It's obviously a critical tool if you're stuck with time, you just simply can't get outside, or weather forces you inside. And it's a great tool for some recovery stuff, and we'll get into that. Where I would avoid using the trainer is if you've got real race-specific simulators. If you're training for an Ironman and you want to go out and do your Ironman-specific ride, of which you should hopefully try and mimic terrain and go through your fueling and hydration strategy, that's better outside. You can't try to claim it's better inside. Now, we have a workaround if you're forced due to weather or time. We have a workaround, and I'll talk about that today. But the dream scenario is you're outside for that stuff. Equal to that, it's better if you have extended endurance sessions outside. If you're just looking to create miles and you have time, it is better to ride outside because of terrain management, because of learning the interactions with your bicycle. It's better to be outside on that stuff. Again, a workaround that we have today if you're forced inside. And then any opportunity that you have to work on handling and skills, you cannot do that inside on the trainer. And that is the curse of many triathletes. Very, very poor handling skills, very poor basic interactions with the bicycle that ultimately have huge performance yield and returns if you can nail it. If you can become at one with your bike and a master of terrain management, that is a huge performance yield in time on your bike splits, than it is just trying to push your functional threshold up more and more and more. So I think as we dive into the sessions, I want to really establish, as we go through these sessions, it's not just about getting fitter. It's not just about increasing your power output. It's not just about the metrics. It's about you riding your bike well, and I will add, being able to retain riding your bike well. And so there are a few workouts. There is what we call end of range, strength endurance type training. We have race specific training. We have recovery rides, endurance rides, and high intensity rides. So those are the five main families of workouts that we would do on a bike trainer. Today, we're going to focus on the first three. We're going to go through case studies of the first three. The end of range or strength endurance, I'm going to talk about what that is, but that is for me the special sauce of Purple Patch, the really good stuff for Purple Patch. Race specific training, we're going to go through a creative solution for you to go through some race specific type focus, and then recovery rides. The important component to remember as we go through these is that the format of the workout is always going to be very, very similar. The actual structure of any workout is going to be the same, and I'll talk to that. The second is all of the workouts have very specific outcome and targets. And the final component is there's always a heartbeat of posture and pedaling, doing it really well. And the reason for that is one of the big causes of performance decline, and I'll talk triathlon speak for 1 second. One of the performance declines that occurs in Ironman and half Ironman racing is the loss of posture and the loss of focus when it comes with fatigue, and people start riding their bike poorly. It's not just that output is going down, they're riding their bike poorly. And so we want to ingrain that habitually to be really, really well. The three elements that we have to play with when we go through is your power, your cadence, and your rate of perceived exertion, or your how hard it's feeling. So we're going to keep that in mind as we go through today. Let me at least dive into training intensity. We tend to operate on 5 zones. The metrics out of these zones are very, very similar to Coggan and most of the most accepted training zones. So your functional threshold, if you're a metric head, is somewhere in the middle of zone 4 here. Let's go through. Your zone 1 will be easy recovery. We're going to talk in terms of the descriptors today. So I think you should remember this as we go through. Zone 1, easy. So that's recovery. It's conversational. You're moving blood. Zone 2 is smooth. That's your endurance level. If we go for a ride for 3-4 hours and we're conversational the whole time, steady riding, that's your endurance level. Many athletes on output on race day of an Ironman will be at upper zone 2. The more elite athletes will be more towards lower zone 3. Zone 3 is strong. That's what you know. Strong. That's a broad range, but it's not breathless. Steady, strong, 2 words, not breathless. At the lower end of this is going to be where you'll be doing your century ride, your Ironman riding. At the upper end will be half Ironman to Olympic distance type racing. And then we come to maximal steady state, zone 4, a very strong effort. But realize maximal steady state, it's sustainable. But at that effort, it requires your complete focus on what you're doing. You're no longer conversational. And this straddles your functional threshold for the metric heads. The final zone, which goes all the way up from hard, where you're riding with good posture, but you have to apply real force on the pedals, is zone 5. And that goes all the way up to max, which is a little bit different. You can only sustain max for 10 to 30 seconds. Hard is zone 5, and it's unsustainable for long periods. So the language we'll talk to, easy, smooth, strong, very strong, hard. So let's dive in. Let's talk about strength endurance rides. And I hope that this can give you some insight. So the first way we're going to do this, I'm going to give you 2 rides here. The first will be strength endurance on what we'll call building block. And we'll talk about the progression of this. And then we're going to show you how strength endurance as a feature can cross-pollinate into race-specific riding. So earlier I mentioned end of range. Your end of range training, I want you to imagine this. Imagine you're sitting at your most comfortable cadence on a flat road. For many people, somewhere between 80 and 90 revolutions per minute. The end of range training is specifically designed to manipulate cadence, to bring you very, very low, or on the flip side, something we don't feature in today's presentation, very, very high. And so the secret sauce, the special sauce, it's not too secret, it's the special sauce of a lot of what we do where we have a lot of success, is especially on these time-starved athletes, is strength endurance, low cadence pedaling. The goal here is to develop heavy resilience. Muscular resilience is a huge component in long distance endurance racing, to improve your overall physiological capacity and also help you be aware of riding tools that you can take outside. Every time you hit a hill, you just don't go to your smallest gear and start spinning up it. And so it has a real focus, or a real goal. The focus here is for you to stay supple under load. When you're asked to go low cadence, your upper body is very quiet. We want to extend the awareness of the range of pedaling cadences you can do. And we also want to establish a strong interval session. Well, the session I pulled out today, it can be somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes, 90 minutes being on the far end. You can even scale it down from there, and I'll talk to that. But this is a very early season building block type of work. And what I mean by building block is it's work that we do to be preparatory for later training. And so what we're looking to do here is to develop the tool, have a focus on pedal stroke, and at slower cadence, you have a greater ability to focus on pedal stroke, and also start to strengthen the muscles, tendons, and ligaments for heavy, heavy work later on. So the structure of the workout is always the same. We'll have a warm-up phase, which is just where you're moving blood. 5 to 10 minutes, very, very easy. Then we have a pre-main set, and the goal of that set is either something technical or, in this case, to prepare us for the hard upcoming work. So in this case, you do 4 intervals of 3 minutes, and each one just building the effort from very smooth, not hard, to a stronger effort. And we build through so that by the end of that, your engine is ready, you're feeling warmed up, and you're able to execute. And we're having you go through 9 minutes. Now, this is really where we might start an athlete. 2, 3, 4 rounds of 9 minutes, where you're starting at slightly lower cadence than you're used to. And at a smooth to strong effort, so somewhere around a zone 3 effort, you're gradually dropping down cadence. 70 minutes, 70 RPM, 60 RPM, 50 RPM, that's low. That requires real focus. It takes complete intent to remain supple upper body, but you're creating the stimulus to get there. And then you start coming back outside, holding form, 60 RPM, 70 RPM. Between each of these, you go very, very easy, and that's important for you to bank on, and high RPM, neurological, high cadence, 95 RPM or above, the other end of range, but it's at very, very low stress. And the reason for that is to work on pedaling efficiency and improve the dialogue between brain and muscle. So this is a starting point. This is more of a technical work, but as you extend this session through, you might end up at 4 by 9 minutes, all at 50 RPM, all at a strong effort. And that's going to be very, very challenging. And that's where it progresses. So you go through and have an extended effort. So that's a strength endurance ride for you. And it gives you a good yield, develops the tool, but the goal is to retain posture and form in your time trial position if you're on your time trial bike all the way through. Well, if we fast forward for the pursuit of time to race-specific riding, now we're actually training for the specific demands of your race. And so the goal here is we want to maintain that strength endurance. You've gone through 6, 8, 12, 20 weeks of strength endurance progression. You're very resilient and you're strong, but we want to retain that focus on resilience. And on a bike trainer, it's really important to do so. We want to have the effort under, at, or above race effort. And we want to ensure that we have a range of intensity that says race of intensity, but a range of intensity in here, because monotony is the thing that we want to avoid. The focus is that you can hold form under fatigue, and we'll get there. And as you move to race-specific training, the key point in this is that we're no longer trying to drive greater power, get more, boost our FTP, whatever you want to call it. We actually start to train for the demands of the race. And so we call bring the bottom up. And what I mean by that is the previous workout we talked about, we actually had the recovery be very, very easy, zone 1. Now you'll notice in this session, the lowest effort that you're doing is an endurance-based smooth effort. So you'll want to be in zone 2 for the recovery, much closer to race simulation as some of the sensations you'll feel. So similar structure, warm up, pre-main set. I left the pre-main set in there. And then depending on your time, the main feature is 1 or 2 rounds of a pyramid. And this is where we're keeping the very strong effort in there at lower cadence. 4 minutes at a moderate to moderately strong effort. So that's that's probably in lower zone 3 at 70 RPM. 2 minutes endurance. That's a chance to reset, find great form, and come to your most efficient pedaling. It's not a time to turn off. It's a time of actually increased focus, if anything else, and realize that it's not complete recovery. We're training you to recover under a little bit of load. Then you go 3 minutes strong. So that's middle upper zone 3, 60 RPM. The stress is muscular here, very muscular versus cardiovascular because the cadence drops. 2 minutes recuperation under load, zone 2. 2 minutes very strong, zone 4, well above your race effort if you're doing an Ironman or half Ironman. And it's a strong effort, low cadence, strength endurance again, and then you build your way back up. At the end of the pyramid, you finish at 4 minutes, moderately strong effort, and you have 3 minutes very easy. That is a time for you to be able to have a little bit of a break, even stop pedaling, or come down to zone 1. You then might go back and repeat the second round in which case you do so. Or if you're time starved and you only have 60 minutes to do it, then you'll go one round through. But the key then is that you finish on the back end with some race-specific effort. And if you notice on the focus, we talk about form under fatigue. We want to train you to find the feeling, not the metric, the feeling of pace effort. And so you go 10 to 20 minutes at your race effort at your self-selected cadence. And the optimal way to do that is not to be driven by metrics. So you're not following heart rate, you're not following power, but instead you're following fatigue and you're looking what comes out. So that's a feature of a workout that we really drive as we go through here. Might be some questions as we go through. I'll come back to the questions at the end. One more ride to focus on, because it was by request, so I did it. Recovery rides. We remember smoking jackets. Make the easy easy. And so the goals here, it's not to get fitter, it's recuperation. But when physical stress is low, one of the goals of recovery ride is to work on your posture and pedal stroke. And one more final thing is to do a little bit of activation. Increase the dialogue between brain and muscles. And so we don't just have you sitting, spinning on a trainer. The goal of a focus is to have you finish this workout feeling better than when you started. The other focus is doing it well. Stress is low. You must keep the stress low, but we want the posture and form to be fantastic. And the gateway is open because you're not driven or forced to try and chase effort. Versus it's really challenging to keep great posture and form when you're doing 50 RPM at a very strong effort. That's not the case here. So here's how we tend to do it. A little bit of easy spinning. I do that at high cadence, neurological conditioning, very, very low tension on the chain, high spinning, brain talking to the muscles, a great activation tool. We then go through a couple of cadence ramps to get you fast and primed. And then you'll go through 1, 2, or 3 rounds of an 11-minute set. And even look at this. 2 90-second pieces, smooth effort, so a little bit of load under cadence. It's pedal stroke there. The pedal stroke is slower, more of a chance to focus on brain talking to the legs. 2 minutes, great posture and form, and then 2 little intervals of 30 seconds where you're going very fast at a little bit more load. That's, hello, welcome, I'm doing a little bit of load, but it's enough to drive through, but not enough to create fatigue. So once you go through that, if you want to do it over the course of just 1 round through, it's going to be a 20 or 30-minute workout. If you want to do it 3 rounds through, you can extend it to 60 minutes. And if you're not time crunched, you do it until you feel better. And then you come back at the end, great form, high cadence all the way through. So that's my mindset of a recovery ride. The other recovery ride, if you're not on a trainer, go outside and do some parking drills. The final ride that we'll talk about, and we won't go into this into the deep detail, but I think it's really important. What about if you're stuck inside, either due to weather or time, and you can't get outside, but you have a really race-specific training session you want to do? I was going to go out and do 4 hours with really specific intervals. Do you just sit on your bike trainer for 4 hours? Not the best return on investment. Much more preferable to split the days. And in fact, even at micro dosing here across into the week, the double session of training is a fantastic tool to hide a little bit of volume and really create great pedaling. Morning session, up to 2 hours if you're on a weekend, shorter obviously if you're in a week. We do a stepper often here where we start very easy, and over a longer period of time, we just progressively increase load to feel good. And then you do go through, and in the morning session, I'll often go through some strength endurance work. You're going to get a better yield in return of strength endurance, end of range, mixing some low cadence and high cadence at load. That's going to tenderize you. That's going to make sure that in the time that you're training in the morning, you're going to create some fatigue in the legs. And one of the goals here is to create race readiness and enable us to develop form under fatigue. So the morning isn't just endurance, it's strength endurance. We then finish up with a little block of work on form-focused endurance work to build you up to make that the big session. And then coming back in the evening, you do a similar warm-up, but then you go in with a form-focused effort to go through smooth pedaling for 5 to 10 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes of strong pedaling, and then 5 minutes very, very strong pedaling. And the whole goal there is to have you drive intensity with great form in the back end. So you might say, okay, hang on, I was trying out to do an endurance ride, but I went and you asked me to do some higher intensity. That's because we compress time. And if time compresses within the scope of the overall program, we have to increase intensity. That is a really important component that you should remember. So the last slide here, guys, scaling. How do you actually scale this? I'm time starved. I can't always ride 60 minutes or 75 minutes or 90 minutes in the morning. Sometimes I don't have enough time. Well, here's the few tips to scale the workout. The first, always try to maintain the integrity of the main set. Typically, the main set will take about 50 to 60% of the overall training time. So you want to try and maintain that integrity. So you scale the time, and the main set will actually probably comprise of a greater portion of your overall workout. The way to get there is you remove the additional set. So if there's any extra work on the end, any cool down, anything like that, remove it. Then you want to shorten, but not eliminate, your warm-up and pre-main set. That's a really important component. Do not eliminate. In order for you to have an effective workout, you must be prepared. So you might shorten, but not eliminate the warm-up and the pre-main set. That's just a good rule of thumb. If you get on the trainer and you're really fatigued, the duration is probably not the problem, but what you do extract is the work. And so, as I mentioned before, just to wrap up, as we're coming to the end, double rides, really high value. If you're stuck inside on the weekend and you have the opportunity, morning and evening sessions are really useful tool. If you shorten the big work outside, add a little bit of intensity. Just remember what you did yesterday and what you're doing tomorrow, because you can't do intensity every single day. Variance is key. There's never a trainer workout where you're just sitting and saying, I'm going to ride at X power, at X cadence. Variance is your biggest catalyst for return on investment. And ultimately, in our metric head world, your return on investment is understanding and appreciating the intent of the workout, having focus and presence during the workout, and doing it well, being able to actually hold form under fatigue. And so with that in mind, that's a very quick and dirty insight. The upcoming book, it's coming out. I will do a quick shameless promotion and then we'll dive to some questions. But the Fast Track Triathlete, it really does a deep dive into this. And included in there is actually, if you are a triathlete, for the first time, I've actually written a 14-week training program, the final 14 weeks, as well as all of a year's worth of leading key sessions that go up to preparing for a half Ironman or a full Ironman. And that training program is dynamic. It's designed to be scalable based on fatigue or on time. So it's really good insight, but it's also an opportunity for you to understand the methodology and really get into the details of how to be a smart, pragmatic athlete when you're trying to integrate this into life. So if you do your pre-sale copy now, we'll give you 20% off. That will be signed. So I'll desecrate the book by signing my name and usually writing a rather funny or ironic saying in there for you. You'll get 20% off. So the code, it looks crazy, but it's PPF for Purple Patch Fitness, FTT for Fast Track Triathlete. So PPF FTT with no spacing. That'll close on September 30th. The book is coming out in October. So please share, and you can find it at www.purplepatchfitness.com. I know that's a tongue twister, but purplepatchfitness.com. And with that, we may just have one or two questions.
Yes, thanks so much for submitting your questions, and you can continue to do so. But we did have a few people submit some questions in advance, so I will address those. So Lucy Brash, she's an investment banker in New York, and her question is about fitting training into a busy day. So she can sometimes get work till 9, 10 o'clock at night, has to get up at 5 a.m. And she wants to know, when is it best to like just call it a day and skip the workout because she's running out of time, or when should she try and squeeze it in?
It's a super question. It's one of life's challenges. So the first thing, the evening workouts first. The evening workouts are only a bad thing if it interrupts sleep. And so if you're consistently cramming late evening workouts in, and then you get the endorphin rush, the hormonal response, and you then cannot sleep until 1 o'clock in the morning and you're getting up at 5 again, that's going to become corrosive. And so the process that we usually have athletes go through when they're actually looking is, let's actually do on a week-to-week basis, on a general basis, on a week-to-week basis, when can I nearly always train? And when is that slot? And then when can I sometimes train? And then when can I rarely train if life gives it a little bit of an ebb and you have that opportunity? And no matter how many hours that is, whether it's 6 hours or 8 hours, whatever it might be, your goal then is to create a training program to utilize those hours. And so you might have to get really comfortable in saying, I'm going to do many less training hours than my neighbor. But ultimately, my mission is maximization of training program in a positive adaptation sense. But typically, something is always better than nothing. Something is always better than nothing. So even if you're using that workout, if you're fried emotionally and you're just actively moving the pedals over on your trainer, that is typically better than actually doing nothing. So 9 times out of 10, get on, work on the pedal stroke, do a little bit of escapism, almost treat the training as an escape and meditation, and then move in. It's probably going to help you sleep. But that aggressive work is where it's very, very challenging. I agree.
Another question that was submitted in advance, and this is about metrics. And Graham Carlson asks, so he has heart rate, he has power, and he has rate of perceived exertion. And sometimes when he's on the trainer, the heart rate doesn't map to what his power zone would be. So when he's riding indoors on the trainer, which should he focus on?
That's a great one. I think the metrics is a huge question, and there are coaches that coach where they determine the power, they prescribe the power, and no matter how the athlete is feeling, that's what you go and execute. You need to go and ride at 200 watts period, and you plug it into the trainer and say, ta-da, because of what I found in an FTP test 2 months ago, that must be the magic number. For people that have really dynamic lives, I think that that's actually not the best way to go. And so you're right, Graham, you have your power, you have your heart rate, and you have your perceived effort. I much prefer athletes to understand the intent and what the feeling should be, and you execute there on global stress. And then you see what comes out. Now, interestingly, there's a secondary reason for that. The first reason for doing it is that you don't know the accumulation of training effect, the accumulation of lack of sleep, travel, et cetera, et cetera. You have to be really aware and self-aware on the inner animal. And so that trains you for that. The second component of not being shackled by power and heart rate is the training that we went through today. You'll notice that we were playing with cadence, going very, very low and very, very high in almost every session. So as soon as you start mixing cadence, it's going to have a disassociation effect with heart rate and power. So if I have you, using a random example very quickly, if you were 200 watts and you're at 150 heart rate, and that was your zone 3, if I had you ride at 85 RPM, your self-selected cadence, it should be pretty similar. 200 watts, 150 heart rate, zone 3. If I had you do that same output in zone 3 and had you do it at 50 RPM, your heart rate might only be climbing to zone 2 because it becomes muscular load and not so much cardiovascular. On the flip side, if I had you ride at 110 RPM at zone 3 power, 200 watts, you might have a zone 4 heart rate. And so for that reason, with our style of training, I much prefer to follow global stress. How am I feeling? And then look at it and use those metrics, which are really high value, use them to look during and following to actually see an objective measure of what happened. So that would be the way that I would go about it myself.
Thanks, Matt. We have another question from Mike Perkins about bike choice. And so how strongly do you feel that a triathlete should be focused on training on their TT bike? Or do you think there are certain sessions during the week throughout the season that could also be done on a road bike?
Oh, I think that the biggest loss for a triathlete is to not have a road bike. In other words, if there is an opportunity to have both bikes, I think it's wonderful. And a global rule, the one thing that's wonderful about road bikes is firstly, they're more comfortable, but secondly, they're much more intuitive to develop all of the handling skills, terrain management. You can really actually develop that sense of counter steering, standing properly on a road bike easier than a bike that's designed just to go straight ahead. And so if you ride 4 times a week, 1 to 2 of your rides can be on a road bike. If you ride twice a week, you might only be on a time trial bike. 3 times a week, 1 of the rides on a road bike. I don't have any problem. If we're doing early season pedal stroke work, I have no problem with an athlete doing strength endurance work on a road bike where they can get some of that hamstring engagement, not to develop power, but to develop awareness of that tool and go through. So I actually think that somewhere between 25 and 30% of your rides can be a road bike, both inside and outside.
Right, I think we have just, we'll just do this one last question since we're hitting up on the hour mark. It's an anonymous viewer who says he has an option of doing an outdoor lunch ride, and it's about 45 minutes to an hour, but he's on the max. Basically, it's a threshold ride the entire time. Would he be better off riding indoors and doing some interval work to get stronger versus trying to chase this group and trying to get stronger that way? So what's the best option for him?
I think the answer there is it depends, and I hate to tell you that. So there's it depends on the rest of the structure of your training. So there is tremendous value of riding in a group, being outside, having athletes that are better than you and chasing them. And that can be the role. That's my mission. That's my central session. And it's fun. It's enjoyable. And you're outside and you're getting outside and you're enjoying nature and you're working on all of your intuitive skills. And so I think that really has its place. At the same time, there might be times that you might need to go through and say, that workout, I'm doing that for a block of time, but I want to increase my specificity. I'm getting ready for a specific event. Or early in the season, I'm really working on this tool, this strength endurance I'm going to go and work on. And in that case, and then it's a heightened specificity. So it's always this balance between precision specificity and the joy of the sport and the enjoyment of the sport, and actually getting a lot out of the group dynamic. And so certainly don't think that you should be banned from that. Certainly there are a time and a place and you should do it, but it probably shouldn't be the only thing and the only place that you're going to get intensity at the expense of some of the building block work that we talked today. Do we have time for one more? Or is that it?
Justin Doyle asks that he's not specifically a triathlete, so he must ride a road bike on his trainer. So he wants to know where he should be positioned, where his hands should be when he's riding under load. Should he be in the drops or on the hoods?
That's a great one. Thank you. So when you're on a road bike per se, let me talk about posture first, because one of the it's Justin, yeah, was that isn't it? Yeah. I will answer your question, Justin. Posture on the bike. Triathletes, those little pads that sit on top, those are for your elbows. They're not for your hands. You never put your hands there. The majority of time, if you're on your time trial bike, you are in your time trial bars the majority of the time. And your hands are extended forward over the end of your bars and you're nice and comfortable and you're supple. There is a time if you're doing very heavy load and you're asked to go very strong at low cadence, that you can come out of the bars and go on your ball horns, so out on the proverbial drops, as it were, in a time trial bike. But you must stay supple with nice soft elbows. You don't want to fall into Loctite shoulders. The body wants to retain that shock-absorbing manner. On a road bike, where you don't want to be is on your crossbar with elbows locked out, wrists bent, shoulders tight. You want to avoid that. So the two places that you want to be if you're doing the heavy load is either on the hoods, just as you would ride outside and climb outside quite often, but wrist in alignment elbow soft, shoulders supple, hands like you can strangle a pigeon, just really relaxed on the bars. Or the same type of composure, but down in the hoods or down in the drops, that's absolutely fine as well. Some of that is independent preference on how your bike is set up and how you like to ride. So if you like to ride outside climbing, or you're sitting a long time in time, not in time trial, but when you're going very strong and you spend a lot of time in your drops, then do some work down there. If you seldom use the drops, apart from sprinting or something, and then develop the tool in your hoods is a great way to go about it. So guys, thank you very, very much. I'm sorry that we didn't get through your questions. One of the things we will do is go through and try and give you guys some answers to some of the questions that came in advance, and some of the people that popped their hand up here. It's always, I'd love to have an extra hour here to go through and talk to you guys. And purplepatchfitness.com, I'd be honored if you had a little read of the book. I think it's going to be insightful and hopefully very helpful for you guys, and we really appreciate it. We will follow up by email for you guys attending with the code, and we'll follow up with some answers to your questions. Thank you very much for being here, and appreciate it, and take care. We'll see you very soon. Cheers.
Okay. Yay. Perfect.